taking over from Deputy Crowe. Thank you for his comments. I just want to address a number of points in relation to this, and I speak primarily as Chair of the Justice Committee, where this pact went through not so long ago. On that note, the first point I want to raise is the procedural aspect, and I've heard many deputies, and I've been intrigued by this constant refrain that there wasn't enough time allowed to debate the matter. I heard the Taoiseach say yesterday under order of business that every member that wanted to discuss the matter or speak on it or contribute would be permitted to do so. Deputy McGrath stood in the chamber, he called for a vote against that. So I don't know, Deputy, were you voting against the idea that every member could contribute? Or were you voting for that? Or it didn't seem to make any sense, Deputy, with all due respect, when the Taoiseach was offering that every member that wished to contribute could contribute, and you said no, vote all. You didn't want that. You were not agreed. I don't know where that comes from. At committee, which I presided over, we had a number of sessions on this. We had an extensive engagement with the Minister for 3 hours, questions and answer, which is widely covered and picked up both on traditional and on social media, with many clips, etc., being circulated. But that, I suppose, shows the degree and the extent of the robust engagement that occurred right and proper at the committee. We didn't leave it there. We went on to another session, another 3-hour block, hastily arranged because we moved quickly to enable the debate and make sure it happened. And then we heard from a range of stakeholders, people like the United Nations Convention on Refugees, people from the Bar of Ireland, ICCL, various different subject matter experts that came in, NASC, a migrant agency, people to come in to give their perspectives on it, and expert perspectives, and we listened to them carefully. We took note, and again we had questions and answers. And the committee was minded to consider whether we needed to go further and beyond that, but we didn't run out of time, we ran out of speakers. The debate only stopped when no other members were offering, including some deputies that were within this House at the moment who came in and wandered off again without speaking. So I don't know where this comes from, and I really wanted to have the opportunity to challenge that today, to say the idea that debate was curtailed or guillotined or shut off, certainly at committee, any member that wanted to, not you, Deputy, no, the member beside you. Members that wanted to speak were entitled to speak, and as always the practice at committee, the members of the committee go first, but non-members are welcome to come in, and many did, and many participated, and they're entitled to do so. But the debate finished ahead of the scheduled time because nobody was left offering to speak. So I think that hopefully puts paid to the idea that somehow debate was curtailed. It's factually incorrect to say that. How was it curtailed? Deputy, you wandered out of the room without speaking. You were in the room, you hung around for a while, and then you wandered out of the room again. The floor was open to you, you chose not to take up the opportunity. I'm not responsible for what you choose to do. You might decide to characterise it in whatever way you want.
No, I was up asking for clarification, so I didn't realise he was addressing me. It was a charade. A line of NGOs in telling us what they wanted to stay here, and they're running the country, the NGOs. So it's a pure charade, and this is a further charade.
No, indeed. The fact of the matter is that the committee held adequate time and only completed its consideration when all members that wished to speak had spoken, and I scanned the room a couple of times and even looked outside to see was there anybody else. There wasn't. That's why the committee finished its deliberation, no other reason. And well, I need one to keep up with you perhaps, but that might be to your credit perhaps. You're a busy man, I know that. But anyway, I don't want to personalise, but I do want to just rebut that very strongly, that any member suggesting there wasn't adequate time is completely incorrect. The other point to make about this is that this is not by any means the end of this. It might be the next stall, it might be a different government, who knows at what stage it will be taken on. But regardless of the vote this evening or whenever the vote is taken tonight or next week, whenever it's going to be, if this is to be enacted, if the Houses vote for it, my understanding is it will go through primary legislation, which will come back before the Houses, come back before the committees. There'll be pre-legislative scrutiny, there'll be further engagement with experts, and any member of the committee is entitled to suggest any expert, as is always the case, whatever side of the spectrum that they're on. And then there'll be primary legislation, and there'll be amendments, and there'll be committee stage, and there'll be report stage, and there'll be Shannon stage, and there'll be Dáil stage, and the whole kit and caboodle. So I think, again, at the risk of repeating myself, the suggestion that this is rushed or inadequate seems to me to be a useful talking point for those who oppose it in the first instance. So what do those experts say? What do those stakeholders say? Well, they said a variety of things, and I think that it's fair to characterise the opposition to this pact as coming in some cases from the right, and some coming in other cases from the left. And I think it's fair to say that the majority of stakeholders of the committee, undoubtedly some are opposed to it, typically those coming from what might be termed a human rights perspective, because they felt it was unfair or inhumane or lacked dignity. Perhaps the camps had certain borders where people are kept for a while and sort of holding pens before they can be processed. And some people coming from the left found that from a human rights perspective to be undesirable, and I understand that to an extent. I do find people on the right using those talking points of people on the left, and again I think perhaps is that a badge of convenience to find something to say against it, and it's ironic that it seems to be most opposed in Ireland by those who might identify as being on the right, even though the European Union at large would tend to say the pact has been hardened, they would say, and really there was a fear among some in the European Union that the pact had gone too far to the right as a result of forces within Europe that were pushing it that way, but yet we still oppose it here, or some do in any event. But Mr. David Leonard, an immigration expert who practices in immigration law, I'll give him the phrase when he said this was an imperfect consensus based upon compromise. I think that's reasonable. I think it's a reasonably good description of it. And I don't want to offend anybody, but if I say that in general, as a rule of thumb, if there's a piece of legislation or proposal which the hard right oppose and the hard left also oppose, it's probably a reasonably sensible proposition. And I don't want to give offence to anybody by saying that, but as a centrist politician, I think if something has opposition on both the hard right and the hard left, it probably means it's a reasonable middle ground compromise. He also gave an analogy which I thought was very, very useful, where he talked about, and this goes back to the idea of going it alone, the idea that Ireland would somehow be an outlier amongst Europe. And I heard, I think it was Deputy Callahan speak earlier about the Brexiteers who thought that might be, I think it was Minister O'Brien actually said it, who thought they could go it alone within the world. But that didn't work out so well. They've actually more immigration than ever in Britain now. They also forgot that EU migration was the least of their worries. They forgot about their former Commonwealth countries who all come back to say hello 40 years later. But Mr. Leonard talked about taking a computer network and upgrading it with antivirus and software and security software and cybersecurity and patching it up to the latest requirements and having an ultra smooth running network, but forgetting about one node in the network and leaving one solitary server sitting out there running an old version. And he talked about the obvious risks that go with that, the vulnerabilities, the fact it can be compromised, the fact that it's not in sync with the rest of the network, and how that actually makes it not stronger but far weaker than the others. And he used that analogy to the pact. If Ireland was to decide to go it alone and somehow stand aside from all the other measures and say, all the other countries, and say, well, we're going to do our own thing, we'll make up our own rules and we'll work this out ourselves, even though this is not just a continental but a global challenge. And I thought again that was a very sensible analogy as well. The other point I've seen raised against this is the point of sovereignty. And again, it strikes me as perhaps that's convenient to avoid saying where a particular party or group stands on the issue. Well, we're concerned about sovereignty. Well, what about the 7 chapters in the Pact? Which from 1 to 7 are you for or against? Well, we won't have to answer that because we're going to say it's sovereignty. And this Deputy, I am speaking with the Sinn Féin benches in that remark. I am directing my remarks that way because that seems to be in the Sinn Féin response. Well, we don't want to surrender sovereignty. Well, every European Union treaty that we've ever signed or every pact we've ever entered into has involved a degree of that. And if we go back to first principles, how did we get to a democratic state in the first place? And how did we get to civilization? Well, we pooled sovereignty. That was the whole idea of Leviathan, when we had people like Hobbes and Rousseau and the rights of man, when we actually evolved to a situation where we made collective decisions for the common good. That's where it came from, pooling sovereignty. We agreed that the Leviathan would be a single centre that we would pool sovereignty into for the collective good and protection of all. That's how it works. That's how democracy works. That's how this chamber works. That's how the European Parliament works. That's how the whole planet works, those that are based upon democratic civilised systems. So I think that's a good thing. I think it's something we've been working for the best part of a century. And I suppose maybe that's just worth reiterating. The system is not perfect. The current system is not perfect. And I don't have time to go into all the issues, but I would say I agree with Senator McDougall when he talks about some of the regulations that we're currently operating under are based on 1950s international treaties, pre-internet, pre-cheap travel, pre-cheap flights, pre-social media. The idea that multiple economically motivated migrants could travel, for the price of a meal, could get on a flight from one continent to another was unheard of or unenvisaged at that time. And I agree that there needs to be an upgrade and a revisiting. And I agree that different motivations may be applied to many arrivals now than was envisaged under those pacts. But what I will say is that's all the more reason why we need to upgrade our system. And like the expert committee, we need to upgrade our software and patch it up and make sure it's on the latest version and running the same as all the other nodes are. So thank you, Karen Corley.
Thank you very much.